Okay, so good day, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to this session. This is a collaborative effort between Blaze and Planly. Blaze is based off in Nigeria. So this is part of our efforts to get people more acquainted on the use of BIM tools, and especially in these changing times that we are currently in. So on the part of Blaze, we've been doing a series of webinars, and this should be the third one we've been doing since last week. And then on the part of Planly has also been organizing some series of Smart Lean BIM Masterclass. So this is just a collaboration from Blaze, and I'm sure you will enjoy this session. So today we have Louis Moran from Planly to be taking us on the masterclass. So I'll be handing over the mic to him to take it up from there.
I'm Louis Moran. Plannerly is located in the United States, California headquarters. However, we do have partners all over the world, including Blaze. So we'll get started with the masterclass. The masterclass is typically a 4-session program that we do with companies that are looking to get started or just learn a little bit more about BIM management. But we'll pack all of that into an overview of what we do in this session today. So today in the agenda in the masterclass, we'll be going over 4 BIM management processes. So the first would be about creating a BIM execution plan, how we would go ahead and do that with a team collaboratively, and how we can agree on that. And we also want to agree on the types of scopes that we need for the project. So that'll be the second part of this session. The third part is managing those tasks. So if we created a plan, there's some tasks that we need to then manage through the project. Then we want to verify those BIM requirements. We want to make sure that everyone has followed those and we provide good quality models. So a little quick introduction. We at Plannerly have this motto, what we call a Smart Lean BIM. And for us, that really means having the right BIM at the right time, by the right people, but specifically for the right reasons. We don't want to do anything that is unnecessary, so we want to have the right amount of BIM for the right reasons. As you know, there's many uses for BIM. You could use BIM for design purposes, for marketing, or winning a project. You can use BIM for clash detection or coordination, or you could use BIM for facilities purposes that would carry on after construction. So there's many uses nowadays for the actual model. And when we look at all the teams involved, they all might have their own opinion when it comes to how that model should be created. So there could be a lot of miscommunication, unaligned expectations, and a lot of money wasted throughout that project just because everyone's kind of modeling on their own or didn't follow the same plan. Then we look at the tools that we're using. So a lot of great tools that we have for authoring, analysis, and use. But when it comes to planning, we use a lot of other great tools in their own isolated environment. So Word, Excel, project management tools that help us with the administration parts throughout the project. So not just creating the BIM execution plan, but using that through the project. And they're also not so connected to the programs we use today. So with the world being more connected, maybe we could use all of these features and tools that we use today, but integrate them and make it more specific around our industry. We wanted to tackle many of the challenges that we hear from our customers, such as, why does my BIM execution plan take so long? Why didn't we know who was responsible for these elements? Why do we have missing scope or duplicated scope? And these are just some of the challenges that we hear from our customers. So let's get started with creating the BIM execution plan. We first need to understand why we want to create a BIM execution plan. As you can see from the images here, there's some misinterpretation, there could be some miscommunication, how the customer explained it, how the BIM consultant described it, what was actually installed. And then at the end, we realized what we actually just needed was a rope and a tire. You know, there's a lot of miscommunication that can happen, and this is just an example of one of those. And what we've seen is before it was just an optional thing. It was a guideline that we should maybe follow. But what we're seeing all over the world now is that it's becoming more mandatory. And we're seeing governments actually making it something that is mandated through their regions. We're seeing a lot of companies that are saying we have to have a BIM execution plan on every project, even developers who are mandating this so that they can align their expectations more clearly because they've realized the importance of having a BIM execution plan. So what are some of the challenges that we have with BIM execution plans? Some of the things that we keep hearing from our customers is that it just takes too long to create. This is why they don't even attempt to create and manage a BIM execution plan. And then when they actually do create one, no one actually reads it. And we can never get all of the teams involved enough to agree on that same plan. So as long as we don't have agreement from everyone, that BIM execution plan is not going to work out for us. So agreement by all parties is very, very important. And when we do have one, it just ends up in a drawer where no one reads. So a lot of time and money that has gone into that BIM execution plan is essentially just wasted at this point. So we don't want this to happen. So here's some tips on how to create a successful BIM execution plan. The first part is collaboration. We need to have everyone involved. You want to create that with your team. So have a collaborative environment. Second, is create engaging content. One of the biggest reasons why we have people saying that they don't read their BIM execution plan is because it's 100 pages long of just text. So add images and videos, make it more engaging, add process maps so that it keeps your customers, your clients, your teams engaged. And today's workflow, we typically create a document, we send it to multiple people, and then we receive a lot of the feedback separately. That takes an administration burden that we have to take on. Give them a collaborative environment where they can comment on specific areas, share them with others when they're ready, and publish them when they've been approved. Let's take a look at a quick demo here. This is my dashboard here, and I'm just going to jump into a project. Here we have a dashboard, where we can invite our teams. And I went ahead and invited some others in here with editing or viewing permissions. So really getting them involved, whether they're just a viewer or an actual editor or manager that can help you create this BIM execution plan. But in here, you'll have your typical project information. And in the plan is where we want to add all of our processes and our standards and project information on how we're going to deliver these models. We can start with brand new from creating a section, or we can start with templates. We have many templates available that have been shared by BIM experts, our partners that we've been working with. So many of them have been translated as well. A lot of content that we can start with, but if you have your own, you can just start with your own project. So I'll go to my company templates. I can drag and drop the folder and bring in multiple sections at once, or I can bring in individual ones, piece them together from different areas. Now I can easily come in and click and edit where I need to be more project specific. I can start inputting that data. Once you've shared this, your team will get notified so that they can come in and provide their feedback. And each of these sections can have their own comments. You can communicate in a single thread. So once they've provided their comments and their feedback and you've made those updates, we can then share each of these sections. And I'll show you here, keeping teams engaged. If we go to BIM Planning Basics, you can see how we've embedded overview videos on how we want to manage this project. Keeping these really rich and engaging is really the key on BIM execution plans. We'll jump back out. A little recap. We want to keep BIM execution plans collaborative, have one place where we can gather comments, have an approval workflow, a way where we can, share how exactly we're going to approve the documents or anything on this project, and then a way we can archive the document. So let's move on to number 2. Let's agree on a clear BIM scope. We first need to understand why we need a clear BIM scope. An architect has a goal. A contractor, an engineer on the projects, they all have their own goals. An architect might be more design oriented with their models. A contractor would love to have everything modeled so that they can pull estimates and quantities. And engineers and subcontractors would be focused on the systems and coordination. We really need to align those expectations. So why is agreement such a challenge today? Well, usually it's because the responsibilities are unclear. We have all of these spreadsheets that really try to help us make those responsibilities, but spreadsheets can get overwhelming with all the information that we're trying to share with the teams. And then we end up with a lot of missing and duplicated scope. So there's people pointing the finger like, well, that was this person's responsibility, or that was this person. There's a lot of miscommunication that can happen when it comes to creating a scope. So here's a couple tips on how to create a BIM execution plan scope. The first thing we need to do is answer the basics, the basic questions. Most important question, why are we doing BIM on this project? What are its actual uses and goals? We need to first define those before we can answer the rest of these questions. Once we know why we're doing BIM, what scope is required for that use? And how much is needed? What's the level of geometry? How much information do we need to include? When is that scope needed? Who's responsible on each milestone for each element or information? We need to clearly define that. And where do we start? What location will we start? In a building, on a level? A scope grid could help really explain all of this information. We first want to define the why. The why could be a structural estimate use, the MEP coordination, an asset handover. These are just 3 examples of why we are going to model certain components. Once we understand that why, we can then understand what scope might be required. Whether you have a scope list, whether you have expectations, so you can build this with your teams, provide a plumbing scope, then a plumbing engineer. So you really want to align what scope you would need for all of these. And once you have that scope, you want to define how much is actually required. What's the LOD level? Or do we need this in 2D, or do we actually need this in 3D? Maybe for quantities, we don't necessarily need a 3D component. So we can save some time by just providing 2D elements. Finding that is very important because it matters on how much effort is into creating this model. Also, when we get into the information, we want a way to clearly define that, whether we discuss these elements in a meeting, whether we have certain checklists that we want to verify at a certain point. We want to clearly define a lot of this information inside of these elements a certain way. And then we also want to define who's responsible. For MEP coordination, the structural is responsible for the steel structure and the foundations. Then we also want to show the handover. For the estimate, the architect might be in charge of the stairs, but you'll see the handover gets taken at the coordination level. That way we clearly define who's responsible at certain points and when that needs to be handed over. One of the biggest challenges we find in projects today. What is the BIM use? What scope is needed and how much is needed and who's responsible are some tips on how to build a scope. So let's have a quick look at how to build a scope inside the app. Here we're still in the plan module. I'm going to jump straight into the scope module. First, want to create the reason why we're doing BIM. So the first thing I'd like to do is say, hey, on this project, we are doing coordination. And what is it that we need for coordination? You can do this with your teams internally, provide something like a draft up front, and then share that with other teams and get their input on what scope might be required for coordination. Over here we have, it's an element library with hundreds of predefined element groups with the elements included as well. So we can start by creating a folder for the electrical team. So this would be the electrical scope. And then we can start to search for the electrical conduits or cable trays items. So we'll go ahead and just put some general purpose electrical power. So in here we'll have cable trays and supports, raceways, and we'll also provide a plumbing scope. So we'll go ahead and add another folder. And now we'll look for plumbing systems, and we'll go ahead and add some cold water piping systems. So here we've quickly built an electrical and a plumbing scope. Obviously we can create a lot more. And now we want to go ahead and define this. We want to go ahead and define what is actually required. So will we be modeling for coordination? Could we just model the zones? Or do we actually need the branch wiring systems? Do we need to model the wiring devices? Definitely need the cable trays and the cable tray supports for coordination. And what LOD would be required, right? So is it LOD 100, 200, 300, or 1, 2, 3? Or just simply want to define it at the element level. And then we'll do the same for the plumbing scope. In here, we might want the same LOD, piping mains, piping branches, and definitely some hangers, and we can avoid some other components in here. And then now we want to define who's responsible for those. Select who's responsible for the plumbing, who's responsible for the electrical, and so on. Very quickly, we define why we're using BIM, why we're going to do BIM on the project, what scope is needed, what elements are required, and if there's any information beyond this, we can open one of these, select through this individual tabs of all of what we have assigned. We can add notes that come out of our meetings, some checklist items. So perhaps the branches could be 1/4 inch and above. So anything 1/4 inch and above must be modeled. And we can even insert attachments such as families. So if we have plumbing fixture families, we can add those directly in here for our teams to download and use for their modeling. Now, creating a scope only gets easier and easier. We've already created this, and the next time we create a project, we can reuse this content. So from our libraries here, we can always recreate the scope from scratch, or we can use it from access our templates. We do have many templates all over the world, classifications that are from all over the world. So a lot of our partners and such have added their classifications that they use, which are the codes for the way the scope lists are created. So we can go back to another project and select exactly what we want to bring in. So in another template or another project, you had design reviews, structural estimates, coordination for level 1 or level 2. You can choose to bring in what you want from that project, and it would automatically populate the milestones. You can also choose to bring in the team's information, checklists, attachments, and the notes. So a lot of these, we'd say maybe the attachments and notes are more project specific. So maybe you just want to bring in the team's information and checklist so that we could bring that in and it would automatically populate the scope grid for us. So very quickly, we've created a plan, we've created a scope. Consider both of these like the framework for a BIM execution plan. So when I'm ready to print, I can come over here to the docs module, select what I want to print, and I want to create a plan, I want to create a scope. We can bring in the teams, the information, customize our headers and footers, but let's call this BEP version 001. We can also open these and look through the settings. So whether we want to create a full document or just a document with the coordination, we want to create a document with everyone's scope or just the plumbing scope or electrical scope. This could be a contract for just with their specific scope. And we have many other settings that we can choose, and we'll go ahead and print. It automatically formats the document that all the information that we've created. provides a quick index, includes all of the videos and information we've included in our document, and provides us a very visual scope, clearly and quickly, with the responsibilities and the information that's required. All right, so let's jump back out. We want to first define why we have BIM uses. We want to define what is actually needed and who is actually responsible for that information. And we also want to clearly define when people are responsible for certain elements. Provide lean information and not include everything to be modeled at a certain LOD. We want to make sure that we provided just the right amount of BIM. Let's take a look at managing those tasks. We first need to look at why we might need to sequence. On the left, you have a non-clash model, and on the right, you have a non-clash model. So both of them are not clashing. This should be successful for both. However, as you can see on the left, you have a lot more fittings and bends. And on the right, we have less bends and a lot less money that was spent to actually involved in the installation. If we had just prioritized the cable trays before the most expensive or the least flexible items, such as the piping, if we had prioritized the cable trays around, we would have saved our installation costs. So why is this such a challenge? Well, what we've realized is that teams don't always get to work in the same room, where we meet maybe once a week, maybe once a month, maybe sometimes not at all. So a lot of the teams are working in an isolated environments, meaning your other teams might have schedules of their own. We never really align our own schedules. If we don't sequence that work, then we end up modeling things in before other items. And we've understood that lean is a new concept. So lean is very more familiar in construction in terms of what needs to get prioritized and sequenced to build and install in construction. Why can't we take that concept into the design process? Here's a couple tips on how to sequence your BIM. If we can prioritize some systems before others and be on the same page, and if we can agree on this priority structure, it helps with the conversations we're having throughout coordination. Start with the end in mind and work backwards so we can sequence these elements as we go. So in the scope, we captured all of those tasks as a requirements for coordination. Let's schedule them. Understand who's modeling, what teams are involved, what's the actual component that you're modeling. It'll be a lot easier to manage the responsibilities throughout. Smaller bite-sized deliverables, maybe once a week instead of once a month. You can catch issues a lot more quickly as they come instead of waiting until all of these issues have been added up over a period of time. So let's have a quick look at how we can sequence these events. So we were in the scope module, we've assigned electrical and plumbing. So let's have a quick look on the schedule. The first thing we'll see here is that we've filtered for the coordination milestone. And you'll see here on the right that these tasks have already been generated for me. It's just a matter of what items I want to sequence. Per our priority structure, the piping must be modeled before the electrical. So we'll go ahead and then we'll adjust for the duration of these components. And once the piping has been modeled, we can then start to model the electrical conduits or the cable trays, as they are a little bit more flexible when it comes to the piping systems. We can then add clear dependencies on what is actually needed to be modeled before we can start the next object. And any one of these can open your content, review the information, review the checklist. And at this point, we might say it's going to be Barry's responsibility to model these components. And on this one, it's going to be Michelle's responsibility to model these components and coordinate with each other. So at any point, any person on this team can come in and see who's responsible. And now I know exactly who to contact if I have any questions or issues or concerns. So that's a very quick one on how to manage or create your and sequence a quick schedule. So, quick recap: you want a way that you can schedule and start your elements at the right time with your teams. So we don't want separate schedules. A collaborative schedule is best. This way we know exactly when to expect certain components or models from other team members. So if I'm relying on other components for me to model towards or around, it's very important that we're on the same schedule. If someone's starting on the 5th level and you're starting on the 1st level, it's going to take a long time before we can actually run some coordination. So we want to make sure we all start in the same areas. Obviously, this will help us reduce a lot of the work. So let's take a look at why do we need to manage these tasks. Here we have Dilbert that's getting asked, when will I get your project status report? So obviously gathering the statuses of a project and the task is just very overwhelming. A lot of administration that we have to do. Some of those challenges that we end up facing every day when it comes to getting progress updates. Well, the first thing is everyone has their own to-do list. And then usually what happens, it's up to one person to call up everybody and ask them, what's the status on your model? What's the status on this level? These systems, these components. So it is like herding cats. It just takes a lot of time. And this ends up with a lot of questionable updates. Do we actually have that? Is it really ready for review? How can we actually know if everyone has their own task? How much is left? So a lot of questions come into managing and progressing updates through a project. So some tips on managing the tasks that we have from our BIM execution plan. So we've created a plan. How can we consolidate all of those tasks that came out of that plan? Use a simple Kanban board. It's a very clear and visual way to see what progress teams are making and what the status of a milestone or a project is. And make it a team effort, right? We believe collaboration is key to saving time and removes a lot of the waste. Team members can actually progress their own tasks instead of one person having to provide those updates. Here on the left is a quick example of Michelle, who is managing her own tasks. She's progressing her own tasks in the Kanban board. And on the right, a manager would just be receiving those updates. So this really helps at a high level and at the level of the designers and engineers. Let's have a quick look inside the app on how we can manage those tasks. The schedule and the track view follow the same filter. The only thing that is changing at this point is the way we see those two tasks. In one, we have a timeline, and now in this view, we have a Kanban board. And they're both integrated to one another. Let's say I was Michelle. I can filter for my scope of work, share when I've started that work. I can then look at what notes and checklists I need to follow. Maybe there's a family in here that I need to use for the model. And then I can progress these tasks on my own for my own team. As a manager, you might have all of these filters off so that you can see it as a whole. And each team managing these tasks is huge in saving time. So a manager can kind of sit back and let these progress updates themselves and then have these conversations on exactly where we need it. Maybe we have a fixes column. Maybe we have a in progress column. So this is a very flexible Kanban board that we can use. So let's jump back out. So a quick update on managing tasks. If we can have one to-do list, that saves us so much time and we have clear communication on what to expect next. Use a Kanban board. That's the biggest tip we can say is use a Kanban board. It's easy. It's very visual. It doesn't take a lot to learn how to use and manage these tasks on a Kanban. And share those updates. So while teams are collaborating on one, these updates become more live and always up to date if we can just continue to manage each other's tasks, and we'll be up to date with those. Let's have a look at how we can verify our BIM requirements. if teams say they're ready for review, let's just take their word for it. I wish that was the case, but as we know, all it takes is one bad model to ruin an estimation, budget or coordination. How can we do any coordination if we're still missing elements from a certain trade or discipline? How can we really expect or have an accurate quantities or a budget estimate if we don't have all of the elements and components that we created in our BIM execution plan or we required in our plan? So very, very key to make sure we have a good quality model. So why is this a challenge? Requirements have always been unclear. This goes back to either the plan, the scope, the schedules, the tasks, and the tools we've been using have been disconnected. So a to-do list for one team was on a certain platform and another to-do list was just a document in another platform for someone else. Consolidating these tools and using the same tools is huge when it comes to communication. So some tips on BIM compliance. We first need a way to gather all of that information. So a BIM execution plan document that's 50, 60 pages long sometimes isn't the right way to consolidate. We want a way to organize the schedules, the teams, who's assigned, what are the major milestones for each of the components. We want a way to organize the scope list, the exact checklist that I need to go through for this trade or this model. And then we want to consolidate all the documents that we've submitted. We want all of this information not to be scattered in multiple areas. We want them all to be in one location. That's huge and in saving us time, but less confusion as we go. And we need to have our note in one area and requirements as well. So we want a visual way to verify the geometry, the information requirements. In a 3D, you want to see it in a 3D view, but also see it against your initial requirements. And never share an unverified model. It creates a lot of risk when we share these models that have not been checked. So let's have a quick look at the verification module. So here we've seen some items that have been started, some items that are now ready for review. So I'm going to go ahead and verify these components. And over here on the right, I have some already uploaded some models. So I have a mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and fire involved. So on the left, we have a tree from the model. I can filter for all the cable trays and link that to the card. I will do the same for the plumbing fixtures. I'll look for the cold water piping and I'll connect that to the actual card. Now that I've connected it to the actual requirement, I can see what status each of these are in. What has been started is the cold water piping and what is ready for review. And now I can actually review them against the initial requirements. Look inside of the task to see if there's any checklist or information that I need to verify against. Does it meet my LOD? We can check all of this against the element information very, very quickly. We can also group all of these components into and align them here so that we can gather all of them in very much more quickly and verify against those tasks. So that might be a lot easier than having to fly through a huge model and review each of these components one by one. We can also cluster the entire project together. Now that this model is been reviewed and verified with both tasks, now we can come up here, verified. We can publish this model. Now this model is ready to download for coordination, for estimate use, verified that it meets all of our requirements, and having both of them in the same has made it a lot easier to make that verification. That's the quick demo on verifying. We've consolidated the requirements in one area to make it easier for the verification. We need a way to review all of the models, and we needed a way to have a QA process against the original checklist or the original scope that we've added. And then we needed a way to share and publish that. So as soon as we published that in the verification, that sent a note across all of our teams saying that model is now ready to be downloaded and to be used for coordination. So consolidating all of that in one view or one tool makes the administration a lot and the QA process a lot easier. To really improve your BIM management, we need a way that we can agree on a plan, where one single location where we can all agree on a plan. We also need a way to create a lean scope so we can clearly show who is responsible for what components and what information is needed, a clear and visual way. We also needed a way to schedule and sequence for efficiency. So prioritizing some models in front of others or elements in front of others, just like we do in construction, would save us modeling hours like it does with material and labor hours in construction. Track the progress. Save yourself some time by having others track their own progress. Have them track it in one place so that we can be all on the same page as a project, as a team. And have a way that you can consolidate all the information that you need to review and have it all in one location so it's easier to verify the requirements against the initial, review the models against the initial requirements before they're actually published. So never really send another unpublished model. So to simplify BIM management, we have the plan module that helps us create standards and processes and a built-in commenting and approval workflow. We have the scope module that will help us create clear and visual BIM scopes. The schedule module that helps us sequence those tasks. And the track module to give us live updates throughout the project. And the verify module to check if everyone's models have been met, all the expectations, all the information, level of geometry, as all meets per our initial contract or requirements that we've asked for.